computer. Okay. Not that. Let's see. All right. So please open whatever app you're using for poll questions, and then we'll have current events. And then you'll get into, I'll break you into discussion groups to talk about the case studies. I've divided up the questions and the other carbohydrate related questions to carbohydrate storage and disorders. Your outlines and bibliographies are due today. I don't know if I put a time on it. So before I wake up tomorrow, you know, submit it. I think as I'm learning how to use Turnitin, I can't accept groups, so I made it so I think I may have sent you an email about this, that you will, those of you who are not the folks actually submitting the assignment, you will probably get a notice that says that it's late or you haven't sent it yet, but just know that as long as somebody in your group submitted it, you will all get graded. I don't want you to worry about that. And then sign up for the nutrient sales pitch. And I see that a number of you have. So then Monday, which is Wednesday today, we'll begin lipids. So watch the videos and I'll talk about the first exam. And I'm going to have a Q&A at the end of class on Wednesday. And then I will mail out the questions after class. And you have till Saturday at noon to answer them. So hopefully that covers time zones, power outages, whatever may come up. If something comes up, let me know and we'll accommodate because it's 2020. All right, so any questions about what's coming up? Anybody confused besides me? All right, now let's see. Are you ready? No, but I will. Somebody be honest. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Syndrome X is another name for metabolic syndrome, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia. I have no idea. I need to stand up. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right. So metabolic syndrome is a syndrome. There are a number of symptoms, if you will, that are part of it, but it's also, since we're discussing diabetes in this module, and when we talk about heart disease, it's also pre-heart disease. But what I remember about this is that that we used to say that there's no such thing as pre-diabetes. You were either diabetic or you weren't. But now with data and with time, we change diagnoses. So metabolic syndrome, let me change this, is diagnosed if you have 3 or more of these factors. So it affects fasting blood triglycerides, which is a type of blood fat, HDLs, which is a type, also a lipoprotein, which we'll talk about when we look at heart disease, blood pressure, fasting blood sugars, and waist circumference. So it looks at a myriad of things. And if you have 3 or more of these, you are diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, which puts you at increased risk for type 2 diabetes, for heart disease. The thing is that it's not like you take a medication for all of these or any of these. What the treatment is to look at each one individually. So if you have high triglycerides, then cut back, seeing a dietitian talking about cutting back on carbohydrates and alcohol, because that appears to be something that raises triglyceride levels. If you have low HDLs, it's low HDLs. Some people, exercise can help raise HDLs. So we look at the individual factors and try to treat those, thus reducing risk. Now, there's some, I never like to use the word cure, because I just have a hard time with that, like I have the word prevent. But what it does is, if you can monitor and normalize all these values, you have definitely reduced your risk of type 2 diabetes, and you've reduced your risk for heart disease. All of the following cause hypoglycemia except too much insulin, consuming a high carbohydrate meal, waiting too long in between meals, taking your diabetes medication but not eating enough. Which is all of the following cause hypoglycemia except. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's look at these. So hypoglycemia is another name for low blood sugar. Hypo means low, right? Like glycemia, hypotension is low blood pressure. GLYC is means sugar, and EMIA is in the blood. So hypoglycemia means low blood sugars. There's something called reactive hypoglycemia, which is when insulin is being produced in large amounts after sugar consumption. Some people's blood sugar, when your body reacts to producing too much insulin, that's kind of rare. As spontaneous hypoglycemia, when your blood sugar, your glycogen stores have been depleted, and this can occur in between meals or when you wake up in the morning and you haven't eaten for 10 to 12 hours. It's not low enough to be diagnostic, but it should make you hungry. Drug-induced hypoglycemia is if somebody has diabetes, they take their medication, but they haven't eaten enough to, the word I like to use is to cover it. So let's say you took your metformin, which is a medication, oral medication for type 2 diabetes, and then the phone rings and you have to run out the door. So you're taking this medication to bring down your blood sugars, but you haven't eaten to make sure that your blood sugars don't go too low. So that's also called drug-induced hypoglycemia. But eating a meal, eating a large meal, particularly if you have, it's mixed with proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, that generally does not cause low blood sugars. When blood sugars start to go down, what hormone is released? Insulin, adrenaline, thyroxine, or glucagon? Which hormone is released when blood sugars start to drop? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, so the correct answer is glucagon. So this is what happens during normal blood sugar regulation. All right, so normal blood sugars for our purposes range between 70 and 110. I won't ask you to remember specific numbers, but this is a range. It also conveniently happens to be a range for healthy blood pressure, but If your blood pressure starts to go up, right, you get up in the morning, your blood sugars may be slightly on the low side or within normal range, and your blood sugars start to go up after a meal. The weather could be perfect, the humidity could be terrific, but that blood sugar in your brain, as it flows through your brain doesn't like it being high. It sends a message to the pancreas to release insulin. So this top picture here shows how when blood sugars are high, insulin helps to reduce blood sugars. It's the key that opens the door to the cell to let the glucose in. Then, as we've said, they'll be stored in the liver and the muscle as glycogen, but once those stores are full, those extra carbons will form fat. Now, as the day goes on, your blood sugars start to drop. They go up and down throughout the day. As they start to drop, what happens is, again, the humidity could be perfect, the weather could be gorgeous, but as that blood with lower sugar in it, glucose in it, flows through your brain, remember, glucose is the preferred fuel for the brain and central nervous system, your brain doesn't like it. So once again, it will send a message to the pancreas, but this time it releases glucagon, right? And what glucagon does is target the liver. The liver stores carbohydrate as glycogen. And when blood sugars go down, glucagon tells the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream to bring blood sugars back to normal. This is one of the homeostatic mechanisms that our body has to help maintain blood sugars. And when someone has diabetes, this mechanism isn't working right. You may have normal blood glucose levels, but still be at risk for diabetes. True or false? It's windy outside. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right. This is true. This is, you can have metabolic syndrome, and part of metabolic syndrome is something called insulin resistance. When someone has insulin resistance, what's happening is your body is releasing insulin, but the cells, the membranes of the cells, for whatever reason, resist the effects of insulin, so your pancreas puts out more insulin. So you need more insulin to keep your blood sugars normal. But what happens over time is that your body stops responding to the extra insulin, insulin production slows, and that's when blood sugars rise, right? So insulin resistance is also part of metabolic syndrome. So you can have normal blood sugars, but you could have high insulin levels in order to keep those blood sugars normal. Can somebody explain what I just said, what insulin resistance is? Because this is an important concept and I want to make sure you understand it. Yeah, Kat.
So essentially your pancreas is overworking to create this insulin, and then it slows down and your blood sugar rises.
Right. So your pancreas is working overtime. It's good job. So and your blood sugars are still normal, but your pancreas is working overtime, right? It's releasing insulin, but over time what happens is that production slows down and the person can develop type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes presents only during adulthood, true or false? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's false. Now, my answer that I'm showing you says that 95% of cases are type 2 diabetes, and that's the non-insulin dependent diabetes. What do I mean by non-insulin dependent? That's what we used to call type 2 diabetes, non-insulin dependent. What does that mean? Yeah.
When you're insulin dependent, you cannot create insulin by yourself, but type 2 diabetes, they just need help creating more insulin.
Right. What happens with type 2 diabetes is that you're either not producing enough insulin or it's not being used correctly. The glucose can't get into the cell, so it builds up in the bloodstream, causing type 2 diabetes. We also used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes and type 1 juvenile onset, but we're now seeing children developing type 2 diabetes. What's one of the major risk factors for type 2 diabetes? Kind of on the slide. Yeah. Alejandra.
Obesity and genetics.
Right. Picking the wrong parents, because there's a genetic component to both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. But obesity, for many people, obesity is related to increased insulin resistance. Now, I'm not sure what to do about childhood obesity. I don't know. I'm more concerned about what we do to kids emotionally and psychologically by making an issue out of their weight. I always hated working with kids when I was an outpatient dietitian, because it's not just the kids that you're talking to the parents. And so you have to kind of get everybody on board. And it's very, very difficult. So I don't know how to work with children. And a lot of times I'm just not sure what the long-term risk is, with the exception of a number of things. And one of those is type 2 diabetes. We'll talk about the complications of type 2 diabetes in a little bit. But if somebody develops complications, if they get diabetes later in life, and it takes another 20 years to develop complications, they may be in their 70s before they begin to experience these complications. However, when you have a child developing type 2 diabetes, then you have teenager not wanting to take care of themselves. Because that's part of the first reaction to being given a diagnosis. And what happens is you see these complications developing in the 30s, when somebody's in their 30s or 40s, much younger, which is much harder for these young kids when they become adults and develop these complications. And it's a much larger stress on the healthcare system. So even though I'm conflicted about what to do with children who are overweight, I do know that type 2 diabetes is a risk factor, and that the complications will present a lot sooner if they don't control it. So those are my concerns about type 2 diabetes and childhood obesity.
Professor?
Yes.
My Zoom isn't working, so I came to take class with Alejandra, just so you know. It's Gabby.
Hi, Gabby.
I don't know why the Zoom link isn't working for me.
Did you try the password? Some folks said the password
Yeah.
didn't work the first couple times.
It still doesn't work. I keep trying. But I'm here.
James. I'm sorry.
Thank you. It's okay.
All right. Well, glad you're here. All right. Which of the following is not one of the polys? Increased thirst, increased hunger, increased blood pressure, increased urination. Five, oops, let me see, I have my mouse. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, what are these polys of which I speak when we talk about diabetes? Marissa. Go use her audio then.
Polydipsia, polyphagia, and polyuria.
Okay, so what are they? I mean, I know what okay, right. You're right. I have problems with asking. Pepe, what do you want to add?
Oh, I was just gonna answer the same question.
All right. Well, what I'm looking for, but not asking the right question, is these are early signs and symptoms of diabetes, right? These are what present. Oftentimes, they may be what takes some, but before I go on with that, let me just say that if you're thirsty, you will drink. And if you drink fluids, you will pee more. So just because you're thirsty and you're peeing more does not mean you have diabetes. All right, just because you have a symptom does not mean you have a condition. All right, so I just want to say that there are times when you're thirsty and you're going to drink, especially if it's hot out or, whatever. So, and part of your body's metabolic processes is to put the water through your system and excrete what it doesn't need. That's normal. We're talking about a lot of thirst, a lot of urinating, and polyphagia means increased hunger. And these oftentimes are some of the presenting symptoms of diabetes. I call them the polys because I can. All of the following are microvascular complications of diabetes except, which is a lot of information in this module. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So the correct answer is heart attack. What I'm referring to here are microvascular and macrovascular complications. Can somebody tell me the difference between microvascular and macrovascular? What does vascular mean?
The heart.
Pardon?
The heart.
Well, here, hold on a second. Whoops. Oh. Microvascular and macrovascular. Vascular means blood vessel. Okay, not Kit. Katie, what were you going to say? Did you raise your hand? All right, Pepe.
Well, I was gonna say it refers to blood vessels. So the macro is the bigger one, which is why it's related to heart disease, and then micro, all the smaller things.
Right, microvascular. Justin, what were you going to say? That?
Yeah, I was basically going to say like the micro is like the smaller blood vessels within you, and the macro, like the same thing, macro is the bigger one.
Right, so microvascular is small or tiny, tiny blood vessels. In this case, the capillaries are the tiniest diameter blood vessel in the body. Macrovascular are the large diameter blood vessels. So what I have on this slide here, and I realized when I looked at it that I marked this one in the upper right as the eye because it looks like a basketball with the yellow dot in the middle. What we're looking at is what your eye doctor sees when the doctor looks into your eyes. Those are blood vessels. Those are capillaries going through your eyes. That's what the eye doctor sees. A lot of times, the eye doctor might be the first one to recognize symptoms of diabetes because what happens with diabetes is that if your blood glucose levels aren't being regulated and they're high, they're going to deposit into those blood vessels. Right. And so that's the eye doctor might be one of the first people to notice those complications. And over time, retinopathy, retina is your eye, complications can lead to blindness. What do I have here? Neuropathy is nerve damage. And the tiny, tiny diameter blood vessels that are farthest from your heart, like in your fingers and in your toes, when your blood sugars aren't being regulated, they can build up in the blood vessels of those parts of your body. And what we're looking at, which is kind of a yucky picture now that I'm looking at it, so I'm just going to put all of you on top of that picture. Well, actually, let me tell you a story. What I used to do when I worked as an outpatient dietitian was once a month, a colleague, a nurse, and I would do a talk for diabetics. We called it Sweet Talk on Managing Your Diabetes. My dietitian friends used to give me a hard time saying, but you make it sound like diabetics can eat sweet stuff. Well, the fact of the matter is they can. But one of the things that my colleague used to talk about was how the diabetic could get an appointment with the podiatrist much faster than non-diabetics, because you have to have somebody else examine your feet because of the risk of developing bacterial and infections. So what we used to say was, if you're walking along, well, let me backtrack. We tell diabetics never to go barefoot. Why is that? Because if they're at risk for developing nerve damage, right? If you or I were walking along a beach barefoot and we stepped on a thumbtack, we'd go, ow, you know, and you'd pull it out right away. But if somebody is developing neuropathy and their foot is becoming numb, they could step on that thumbtack and walk around for who knows how long and finally say, wow, this doesn't feel right. I'm standing here shaking my foot, which you can't see because I'm in the front of the classroom, but you can't tell. And then they would pull out the thumbtack. In the meantime, all that time has elapsed, and whatever bacteria or whatever pathogens have been on that thumbtack have now gone into that person's body and made them sick. So that's why we tell diabetics never to go barefoot, because of neuropathy. Nephropathy refers to nephrons, which are tiny blood vessels in the kidney. And again, with not maintaining normal blood sugars over time, this can build up in the kidneys, and people that wind up losing kidney function. Your kidneys are one of the things that, two organs that detox your blood. And if your kidneys aren't working, then those toxins will build up in your bloodstream. Does anybody know what dialysis is? You know, I've got 25 faces on my screen. If somebody just wants to talk or not, Justin.
Hi, so I actually wanted to ask a question.
Sure.
But so I used to be a swimmer in high school, and once I was at a swim meet, and a guy, like, there's a group of people around this one guy, and he came to us and he was like, guys, look at this, like, I think I broke my toe. And we were all like, how do you think, well, my foot, and we were like, how do you think you broke your foot? And then we looked at it and it was like completely like mangled. And he was like, oh, I can't feel anything in my foot. Like, I just never can. Do you think that was like a warning sign, or like?
Well, now I have to tell you, I did my medical internship on Grey's Anatomy, or whatever medical show people are watching these days. So I don't know, but the fact that he didn't feel anything is not good. Sometimes, cocktail chatter, when you have such a thing happening, because your body puts out adrenaline, you might not feel anything for a while, but eventually you'll feel something. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that when I was in graduate school, we used to be able to do labs where you could actually take your own blood. Now you can't do that. And a colleague found, if normal blood sugars are between 70 and 110 milligrams per deciliter, you don't need to remember that. His was 400. He found out he was diabetic in a lab in graduate school. So I don't know what it is, because we learn to live with certain discomfort, you know, we learn, as I just said, just because you have a symptom doesn't mean you have a disease. So, you know, that's maybe why people should have checkups every now and then. But yeah, I don't know. Do you know how he's doing?
No, I haven't heard from him since then.
So anyway, I was just telling you all about microvascular. The question had to do with macrovascular. Macro is larger diameter blood vessels. So that would be macrovascular complications would involve a heart attack or a stroke. Those involve larger blood vessels. Okay, so that's what that was about.
To answer your question on dialysis, I can try and tackle it.
Oh, sure, thanks.
Isn't it when you get your blood filtered on a machine because the kidney isn't doing what it's supposed to in terms of reducing toxins?
Absolutely, that's right. You got that absolutely right. So as I started, your kidneys and your liver are the organs that detoxify any waste that builds up in your body. In particular, the ammonia, when your body is processing protein, if you're not using that nitrogen from the amino acid for other things in the body, then what happens is it forms ammonia. and ammonia is toxic. So your body converts it to urea and then you excrete it. And there's actually a blood test called blood urea nitrogen that assesses how your blood is processing things. If your kidneys are not working, then those things build up in your blood and it can be fatal. So when a person goes on dialysis, basically instead of the blood going through the kidney, it is filtered through it goes through an external filter to take out the toxins. Yeah. And I don't know if this is still true, but I wouldn't be surprised if young people that are on dialysis are type 1 diabetics, a large number of them, because we used to call type 1 diabetes juvenile onset diabetes because it's the one that young kids get, and it's also the insulin dependent diabetes. You have to have insulin because your body doesn't make it. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Can somebody tell me what that means? All right, I'm gonna pull my list here. Oh, Jackie.
Essentially, the immune system attacks itself.
Right. We talked about autoimmune briefly when we looked at celiac disease. We have an immune system that is designed to distinguish between what's called self and non-self, right? If it's self, it belongs there, your immune system leaves it alone. If it's non-self, your immune system will attack it and try to get rid of it. Autoimmune is what I refer to, and I tell this to my health and disease class, as defective recognition of self. And what happens is, for some reason, your body with type 1 diabetes is looking at the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin as non-self, and it destroys them. So the person with type 1 diabetes is not producing any insulin, and therefore they have to get it exogenously outside the body, or they'll die. Okay. Oh, all right. Before we get to this, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I want to ask, so do any of you know folks who have diabetes? And just say it, you don't have to, or raise your, whatever.
Yes.
Yes, and what kind of diabetes do they have? You know?
Type 1.
Type 1, which means what? That's okay. Somebody else who knows someone with diabetes? Alejandra.
A friend of mine, I think she has type 2 because she doesn't produce enough insulin, so she has a pump in her stomach.
Okay, so I would say she has type 1 diabetes, because but there are type 2 diabetics who may decide to take exogenous insulin to preserve the insulin that their body is, whatever little insulin their body is making, for as long as possible. So they might need a lower dose. Whether or not they need a pump, if you have the support and the insurance, then the pump is supposedly fabulous. Not everybody is able to get it, but I would say that chances are your friend is type 1 diabetic, especially your demographic, because type 1 diabetes is what doesn't mean there's no type 2 diabetes in your demographic, but it's usually type 1. Who else knows folks with diabetes? Allie.
Yeah, one of my best friends from home is a type 1 diabetic since she was about like 9.
Okay. Georgia, did you raise your hand?
I have the same thing. One of my friends from home found out when she was in like 5th grade, and she was in the hospital for a few days and they figured it out.
Right. Well, they present is the word we use. They're the presenting symptoms, what brings them to medical care, whatever symptoms those are. Jordan, did you raise your hand? What were you going to say?
Yeah, my cousin has type 1. He's had it his whole life. So when I was younger, I would always see him pricking his fingers at the table and everything. And I would always ask because I didn't know. Obviously now I do, but yeah.
Yeah. Tyra.
I was gonna say, one of my friends from high school, she had type 1 and she had to cut grapes and portion those out to manage her blood sugar.
Because they have to count their carbohydrates. It's the carbohydrate in food that converts to glucose, right? That's why glucose is called blood sugar. It doesn't matter where the carbohydrate's from. It can be a complex carbohydrate or it can be a simple carbohydrate. They all get converted to glucose in the liver, and blood sugars is what a diabetic is measuring. That's why when module 2 in the video talked about the exchanges were originally designed for diabetes management because the foods were broken up into carbohydrate units, if you will, based on how much carbohydrate was found in each serving. A serving size of carbohydrate is 12 to 15 grams. And for a type 1 diabetic, depending on how they measure out their insulin, let's say 15 grams is 1 unit of insulin. By estimating how much insulin they're having at each meal, they know or guesstimate how much insulin their body needs. Okay, so it's a carbohydrate. That diabetics should not be drinking juice because it's liquid sugar. That being said, I would never say never because if somebody's blood sugars are tanking, juice will bring their blood sugars up very quickly. We tell diabetics, particularly type 1 diabetics, but diabetics in general, because you might take your medicine and have an emergency and forget to eat something, or just forget to eat something because, global pandemic, and your blood sugars start to drop. And so we used to tell folks to carry around little tubes of icing because, okay, we've been together long enough, I can tell you now, glucose can get absorbed under the tongue. I know I told you it, but it didn't get absorbed till the small intestine. But in some cases, sugar, and this is not, this for diabetics, well, this is important, it can be absorbed from the tongue, under the tongue into the bloodstream. And for a diabetic, it can help bring up their blood sugars very quickly, but they must follow it up with complex carbohydrates and protein because you get your blood sugars up, but you have to keep them up, right? It's one thing to get it up, but if they're gonna tank right away, that's not good. Yeah, Kate.
It's Christy, but that's okay.
It's Kay, and I got cats and kits and Katie's.
No, I think you called on me earlier, but I didn't realize it was me. There was a boy that it was in the next hometown, and like his whole life, his mom was known to be like super strict on like what he eats, constantly measuring. And when he got to school, like within the first month, he was just like having a cold and he was sick, but he was still pumping insulin. And his roommates thought that he was literally asleep for 24 hours, but like he passed away in his dorm, and it was literally because he didn't eat when pumping insulin. So it can be like very, like if you don't monitor and measure, like it can be so dangerous.
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, diabetics are supposed to wear bracelets that let folks know they're diabetic because symptoms can mimic being drunk.
Yeah.
And yeah, wow. Any other comments about diabetes? Anybody else? Okay, then what I'd like to do is, who's got current events today? A lot of people. Annabelle, what do you have for us?
So I found an interesting article written by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention on the National Diabetes Statistics Report on 2020. And one of the key findings of this report was that new diabetes cases have decreased over the last years in people over 20 years old. However, new diagnosis of type 1 and type 2 diabetes has increased among the US youth. And for adults, 50% of these new cases were smokers, 89% were overweight, 38% were physically inactive. And I found the statistics particularly interesting because they are related to the topics we discussed in class of how in order to manage metabolic syndrome, one should not smoke, and one should do regular physical activity, and one should lose weight if obese. And it mentions how this report is intended for a scientific audience, and how it is an update of the 2017 National Diabetes Statistic Report, and that the estimates in the document were derived from various data systems of CDC, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and the US Census Bureau.
Okay. Yeah, exercise is very important for a number of people. For diabetics, exercise is like insulin. It makes their cells more responsive. Exercise, for some reason, helps make their cells more responsive to the insulin that their body is using. So when diabetics are exercising, if, for example, they're type 1 diabetics and they know they're going to be exercising, they need to talk to their, we call them certified diabetic educators, diabetes, what to do about taking insulin, if it's oral or if it's, if it's shots, whether it's pills or shots, because you don't want to exercise and then have your blood sugars go too low. You might want to eat more before you exercise so that you can cover what the exercise might do as well as the insulin that you're taking. It's, yeah, that's very, but it's important. Exercise is very important. Yeah, thank you. Jordan.
So I actually found an interesting clinical trial that was actually on Facebook. Like, it was one of those ads that pops up, and it was for a COVID vaccine trial.
Yeah.
So I clicked on it. I was just curious because they make the headline so kind of eye-catching. Like, you can make, I think it said up to $740 if you do this. And the website was called IQVIA. It was a clinical research study for vaccines to prevent COVID-19. And the volunteers who are interested test how safe potential new vaccines are and how well they work. So I thought that was a little bit scary because they don't know how safe the vaccines are, so it could potentially kill you that you don't know, but they need people to test them. And so all the people had to do to see if they were eligible was to do a questionnaire, a physical exam that tested their vital signs, and some patients took a COVID test. And they were either assigned to an investigational vaccine or a placebo. And you have to be 18 years or older, have good health, and not have COVID. So I don't know, I thought that was interesting that they're putting it on Facebook because people might just be at home scrolling through, especially during a pandemic when people are kind of maybe in economic hardship, and they say, oh, $800, okay, and then they put themselves in unnecessary danger not knowing what these vaccines could potentially do because the people don't know what they do. They don't know the side effects yet, so that's for the people to test out.
But so is your problem that they're trying to recruit on Facebook, or that you think it's unethical? I mean, what's the, because they are doing a double-blind study, right?
Yeah.
They're experimental and a control group. They are offering financial compensation because people are going to be, you know, committing to a period of time. They're going to have, I don't know if this is legitimate, but I'm just wondering, you know, they're going to be doing physical exams and monitoring their health. So I guess my question is, what do you think is wrong? What's the problem with it? Yeah, it could be dangerous, but how else do you think they should recruit folks?
I don't know. I just felt like the way it was kind of presented on a platform like Facebook was just a little strange. Okay. And as I read into it, the website seemed...
Oh, she froze.
And I feel like you'd have to do more research or contact them to find out. But yeah, I don't know. It just seemed a little weird to me and potentially really but I probably wouldn't.
And that's fine, but I think that is, well, we live in a mecca of research. So, you know, if you turn around and cross your eyes, you can see recruiting for a study in the greater Boston area. But this is a platform. And what they're doing is recruiting for a phase 2 clinical trial, all right? So you have your phase 1 where, you know, you see it's a small trial. Then you go to phase 2 where you're testing for safety. Phase 3 is efficacy. What they're doing with COVID because of this rush is combining in some cases safety and efficacy. But I know that some people do get involved in clinical trials because for some people that's their only health care. So I understand, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, it's a legitimate concern that, but I just, you know, I think I'm looking at it from my perspective as one way of trying to recruit, because just because somebody is recruited doesn't mean that, I mean, somebody sees it doesn't mean they'll be accepted.
Right.
Yeah, so, but no, you're right. I think these are odd times and things are being done. Yeah. Thank you. Sasha.
So I looked at a piece that covered intermittent fasting, and it was a survey actually, and it said, or sorry, it was a study conducted, and they said that there wasn't a considerable difference between participants that would do intermittent fasting and then participants that would. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really interesting because it just goes to show that it's, I mean, if we think about it logically, it's about caloric intake. And if you have the same caloric intake within that window or outside of the window, it's the same amount of energy that you're putting into your body. So all else equal, it should not really make a difference. So I think that was really interesting.
I think we read, this was just put out, right? Did you read what was in the New York Times, or what were you looking at?
I looked at the study itself,
Okay.
like I can try to link it if I can go
Oh yeah,
back.
if you want to. I thought that I had actually taken down some information on it because I thought one of my groups was doing intermittent fasting, and you don't get much more current than last week that it was just published. But yeah, because it said that there was no significant difference between the intermittent fasting and just caloric restriction, which actually has been tested, but it's just also now it's being reproduced. But there are people who like intermittent fasting. It fits with their lifestyle. There was some suggestion that it may improve certain metabolic measurements like blood sugars and blood pressure, but that doesn't seem to be bearing out in larger studies. If it's something that works with your lifestyle and you're getting the nutrients you need, fine. But if you're just eating whatever you want between 10 and 8 or 10 and 6, not so good. But yeah, put it in if somebody wants to look at it, because I know people are big fans.
Yeah, it was actually published online 2 days ago, so the 28th. So I have the study here and I can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mylin.
Hi, so I read an article on Healthline about the alkaline diet, and this was just released like a few days ago as well. So for those of you who don't know what the alkaline diet is, so basically the claim is like after your consumption and you metabolize your food, the food produces metabolites that are acidic, neutral, or alkaline. So they're saying that foods that are alkaline is like negative acid load, and that's like better for you versus the acid forming foods such as like dairy, eggs, meat, and most grains. So the alkaline diet basically helps your body maintain the blood pH level. And they claim that this will help you lose like weight and avoid problems like arthritis and cancer. But as we learned like in class, and the fact states that like nothing you eat is going to substantially change your blood pH level because your body is always at work to keep that level constant. So they have done like clinical trials, and but research doesn't support the theory that acid forming diets harm your bones, whereas protein, an acidic nutrient, can even be beneficial. And so, yeah, there's really no link between acid forming diet and cancer, although alkaline diet does promote like that healthier diet where it encourages you to take more of fruits, vegetables, and plant foods. But their claims on like maintaining the pH levels and preventing arthritis and cancer haven't been proven yet.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, I call that the Trojan horse. There's a little bit of truth in there, and then once they get in, they try to suck you in. I mean, the idea that an acid pH will kill cancer cells, yes, it will also kill healthy cells. I mean that an alkaline pH will, well, what, you know, it's a meme, you know, like acid pH will kill, no, what am I trying to say? Alkaline will kill healthy cells, which is why you should follow this diet. Well, it'll also kill healthy cells. But we're talking about a test tube, and we're talking about that the body's buffers don't work. So yeah, very good. Thank you. Only because it confirms what I've been saying. So, you know, yay me. All right. And Kevin, what do you have?
So I found this article on monk fruit sweeteners.
On what?
Monk fruit, M-O-N-K.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not as current as everybody else's current event. It's an article from last summer, but it's my first time ever hearing about this. And so allegedly, like, it's 0 calories and it's 100 to 250 times sweeter than regular sugar. And it also has antioxidant properties. And the part about this article that really surprised me is there's a claim that there may be anti-cancer properties. And there's a link to research by NCBI with leukemia. And I just find it surprising how like a sugar can have anti-cancer properties. Like it
And
just,
how did they back that up?
so it's this I found this they hyperlink the research on NCBI with like
PubMed?
so yeah, it's Mogro represents a novel leukemia therapeutic, and Mogro is like the sugar in monk fruit. So
And the research, I'm guessing, was done in a test tube or a petri dish?
No, they didn't specify. But
nickel. Send me the link. Send me the link. I want to look it up because I bet, because yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean I don't hear of everything, but I always, when you hear the word may, always remember may not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Eat it because you like it, not because you think it's gonna.
Yeah, to me, it just sounds like something like they would slap on a food label and say like, oh, this sugar could cure cancer, like buy it from us for like.
Right. And if it says could, it also could not.
Right.
All right, these were great. Thanks, folks. Okay, let's see. Where are we? All right, so what I would like you to do is I'm going to divide you. Whoops, no, I still have, wow. Whoops, I just lost my class. Here we go. I'm going to save these for next class because what I'd like to do is put you in breakout rooms so that we can get discussion going on these questions. So I sent you the link to the Google Doc. Again, please, in your groups, pick your person who's going to lead the discussion, someone who's going to write things down and put it in the Google Doc. And then when we get back together, the person who will tell us what you were talking about. All right. And all right, group one. What was your question and what are your answers?
Yeah, so we had the case of Morgan, and so we were asked to identify what the symptoms were. So Morgan was experiencing thirst, dizziness, blurred vision, and an awkward feeling of numbness in her right foot, which we said are all microvascular symptoms. And then why she had the symptoms. She was obese and she lived a sedentary lifestyle, and it's also partly genetics. She's Native American, and they said it was common.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I would also include why was she having those symptoms, because the glucose, when you aren't able to regulate your blood sugars, keep them within that normal range, when they go up, they will deposit in the capillaries of those tiny blood vessels. And that's what causes the numbness, okay, and that's what causes some of the symptoms. And what were some of the things that her family recommended she do?
So just jumping in, one of her friends recommended that Morgan try the Atkins diet, which was supposed to limit carbohydrate intake. We didn't think that was the best option, so we looked at what her brother recommended, and he said that she should start to exercise and maybe limit intake of foods like pizza, candy, and in his words, food filled with fat. And then her grandfather recommended that she look to like traditional herbal remedies instead, which we weren't like totally convinced on. So at the end of the day, we recommended that Morgan take the advice of her brother, because we decided that it's the dose that makes the poison. So if she's able to kind of like work in other food choices, like maybe like fresh fruits and vegetables, and like limit her intake of pizza and candy, it's the lifestyle changes that will make a difference with type 2 diabetes.
Right. So it's not that, home remedies don't have any benefit. It's a lot of medications have come from plants, but in the medication, the dose, it's you've isolated the active ingredient, what the potential side effects are. So this question didn't include glycemic index? Was I reading something up? So for watching, people talk about the glycemic index and that some foods raise your blood sugars faster than others. I would say only diabetics should pay attention, because they're the ones that are having trouble regulating blood sugars and consuming more complex carbs. I don't know that foods filled with fat, I agree with you that it's the dose, because fat may slow down blood sugar rises. So, but yeah, certainly you can have pizza, but 1 piece instead of 4 or something like that, because having proteins, carbohydrates, and fats as a combination can help slow the rate at which blood sugars rise and then keep them within normal range. So yeah. That was Morgan. She had type 2 diabetes. She didn't know what her, we learned to live with certain discomfort. She didn't realize, that this was her situation until she finally went to the doctors. Okay, group 2. What about Andrea? Nobody from group 2? Annabelle? Lizzie?
So we were asked that what happens to metabolic when someone develops type 1 diabetes, and usually the body's own immune system destroys the insulin producing cells in the pancreas, and type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease caused by genetic or viral factors. How there is no insulin, how's there no insulin to let glucose into the cells, consequently sugar builds up into your bloodstream. And what caused Andrea's complications, weight gain and increase in sugar intake.
Okay, so I'm going to give you another chance to get this one right, because that was not this case study. So I would like you and your colleagues, or pick somebody or 2 of you, but read the case study and answer the questions. That's not what happened with Andrea. Okay, so please read the case study and answer it. Unless it's, so those who read the, how about this? Did anybody read the case study and help them out? Okay, so Pepe, what did you get from?
What was the question though?
Well, I guess what caused Andrea's complications? What was Andrea's story and what caused her complications?
I'm not actually sure. I just know she showed like, Andrea's the sister one.
Well, Annabelle, you're absolutely right about what causes the complications, but she was not overweight. What do you recall, Pepe, from reading her case study?
I only wrote answers to the case questions, so I actually can't remember. I read it a few days ago.
Well,
sorry.
No, I will tell you, and I will ask you to read the case study and put the correct answers in, but she's what we call a brittle diabetic. And she's somebody who has type 1 diabetes, and apparently, because usually folks in her situation who, because from what I read from the case study, she probably had insurance and she had a family that cared about her, but she could not keep her blood sugars under control. And that's what made this stand out. She died of a heart attack at 38. She went blind, and that's some people who have diabetes, this kind of diabetes, no matter what they do, they can't keep their blood sugars under control, unfortunately. But that's what makes for a good story. This was her situation. But it had nothing to do with being overweight. So that was sort of a giveaway. All right, group 3.
Hi, we're gonna talk about glycogen and insulin. So glucagon interacts with the liver to increase the blood sugar levels because of the liver to convert stored glycogen into glucose, which is released into the bloodstream.
And then insulin decreases blood sugar levels, so it helps cells use glucose for energy, and it stores it in your muscles, fat cells, and liver to use for later when the body needs it. The pancreas, when it needs it, will release the insulin into the bloodstream when there's a rise in glucose.
Okay. All right. So and that's normal. What happens with what happens with diabetes? With insulin and glucagon?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. So with type 1 diabetes, basically what we had was that the person has a lack of insulin production, and then without the insulin, their body is unable to regulate their blood sugar levels. And then with type 2, it's caused by insulin resistance and is predisposed by obesity and genetics.
Right. So with type 2, they are producing some insulin. They might not be produced enough, or it might not be being used correctly. Right. Now, glucagon is interesting because type 1 diabetics, what does glucagon do?
It increases blood sugar levels.
Right. It targets the liver to break down glycogen stores and help raise blood sugar levels. Sometimes type 1 diabetics will carry glucagon tablets with them if they're not carrying sugar, or they might get injected with glucagon because that's a quick way to get their glycogen stores to break down and bring up their blood sugars. All right, group 4. Why might the newborn of a woman with gestational diabetes be overweight?
We said that higher than normal blood sugar in mothers would lead to that extra glucose traveling to the baby through the placenta, causing it to gain extra weight.
Okay. And the other question?
I can answer it. So why might the newborn have hypoglycemia at birth? The child is used to having to process extra glucose brought through the mother in the womb, and when they're born, they lack this extra glucose, causing their blood sugar levels to drop. Right. And a way to mitigate this, or the treatment, would be giving the baby a fast-acting source of glucose.
Right. After checking their blood sugars to make sure that they are indeed low, because that doesn't always happen. Okay, and group 5.
So ours was, what is the protein sparing effect? And it's the process by which the body derives energy from sources other than protein. And carbohydrates are unquestionably more efficient as protein sparers than our fats. And then the second part of our question was, what is the difference between lactose intolerance and milk allergies? And lactose intolerance is when you can't digest the lactose, and which is the sugar found in dairy products. And you'll get symptoms like stomach pain, gas, and is strongly tied to evolution and gene mutations. And then with the milk allergy, the symptoms affect more your digestive tract. So this causes mucus formation in respiratory tract, hives. The allergy elicits immune reactions involving antigens and antibodies.
Okay. So with intolerance, it's an enzyme deficiency. So it's a non-histamine mediated response, whereas with milk allergy, it's a histamine response to a protein in the milk. It could be, most often it's casein. Okay. Questions about the questions? Right, let me just, one more. Oops, come on, open up. All right, so next class, we'll talk about exam 1. No, this is the wrong slide. I hate my life. No, I don't. All right, so next class, we'll talk about fats. So I will post the questions and I'll talk about the exam. And I think this will be the end of the material for exam 1. I think that's plenty. I don't know, I usually give 2 exams and a final. This is the first time I'm just doing 1 and a final, but I think we have a lot of material for 1 exam. What do you think? So I think that we'll, doesn't mean that the other information isn't very important, but, and what I might do is, I need to think about this, but if you want to continue the conversation, if you have any other experiences or knowing folks with diabetes, I might open up a Flipgrid just to hear, you know, so that you can participate and engage. Any questions? All right, well, you go now. Have a good weekend. I'll put out a short weekend review.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good one.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you.